and so much, but I've had to demo Fabricator like every day for like weeks at Pinterest, like for a couple months. So um,
Cool.
I'm pretty well versed in it.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, we are live. It is November 5th, 2014. We're doing a special midweek Hangops. Kind of came together last night. Going to talk about an interesting tool that seems to be getting more popular. It's called Phabricator. It's actually a suite of tools. Came out of some stuff at Facebook for software engineering. Got Dave Dash here to kind of share with us a little bit about that and what's going on with it. You want to lead off with a little bit, kind of like who you are and how you got into using Phabricator and kind of what it's for?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Dave. I'm a DevOps consultant. And so how I got into using Fabricator, a few years ago, I was evaluating what tool that Pinterest was going to use to manage their source code, and we were deciding between. We were a fairly small company at the time. We were maybe 50 people or so, and we were deciding between um, GitHub Enterprise, GitHub.com, or Fabricator. Fabricator was kind of new to us, but a lot of former Facebook people were part of Pinterest, and they were like, "Hey, you should check this out. You know, we know Evan Priestley who created Fabricator. It's pretty cool." And we're like, "Okay, yeah, we'll give it a try." At the time, we were like, "No, this is fine, but it's like it's just three dudes like just hanging out, and they're the only ones maintaining this. Like, we want we want something with the word enterprise in it, and a company behind it." And so we were like, well, let's just go with GitHub Enterprise. We also knew we knew it pretty well because it was me and another intern of mine who were kind of pushing for it because my intern was Owen Coates who was formerly from Mozilla. So we were both like ex-Mozilla people who were like, yeah, GitHub is awesome. Let's use GitHub. So we went with GitHub Enterprise, and in the 2 years we had used GitHub Enterprise, and we were like, yeah, this is good, but there was a lot of like friction that we ran into. Um, and as Pinterest grew with a lot more engineers, it just seemed to fall apart for our use cases. Um, and so we started looking at Fabricator again. One of the things that we noted immediately is that while GitHub is pretty awesome and GitHub Enterprise is pretty awesome, like there were often issues that were just out of our control because we couldn't run GitHub Enterprise in our AWS platform. Um, Fabricator we totally could. In fact, when we decided to revisit it, I was able to just ping Evan Priestley, and he just said, "Hey, I'll just stop by and help you set it up." So he helped us set it up. Um, Not that you needed it; it's pretty well documented, and we got it running, and it we ran into bugs, and they would fix the bugs right away, like with a few minutes turnaround time. We could just do a git pull, and we would be up to date with a new version of Fabricator, and it would have that bug fixed. Um, this was awesome, and this was like kind of like that white glove support that you just don't get from any company, but you could sometimes get from like a well-maintained open source project. And Fabricator is totally that. It's a well-maintained open source project. They know what they want to do. They have a good roadmap. They're clear on what they are going to build out. Um, and so, yeah, that's my short intro to how I got involved with Fabricator.
Okay, cool. And so, you certainly mentioned, GitHub Enterprise, right? Which like you've got source code, you've got some issue tracking, you got pull requests, and the pastebin stuff, right? And Fabricator obviously has a lot of overlap with those, but it seems to do a few more things. Uh, you know, like looking at like the sort of the core like stable apps, right? You've got code review, wiki, work tracking and bug tracking, project management. It's got the CLI, and then it's got it looks like either it can do repository hosting or you can wire it up to other repositories that you have running, right?
Yep, exactly. And actually, that was a huge benefit for us because one of the first emails we sent to Evan is, "Hey, we want to evaluate Fabricator, but we really don't want to do flip the switch and have to rehost everything on Fabricator." And he's like, "You don't have to. You can just import your existing repositories in there." And in fact, at an existing client I'm at, they use GitLab, and I was like, well, I don't like GitLab, but I like Fabricator, so I set up Fabricator, imported stuff from GitLab, so both things exist, but it's pretty easy to just work with, and not have to commit to, right? Like we can just throw it away if we have to. As far as the overlap goes, yeah, it's quite a bit. The thing that I think it adds is, well, the thing that it really adds for a lot of engineers, the first thing they noticed was, and this was before GitHub releases, was side-by-side diffs. Like they had side-by-side diffs always, and that was just always their thing. And people tended to like the way they tended to like the way those things worked. The other feature that's super important is you have these things called macros, which are basically and I know I'm going to start a flame war, but I'm going to pronounce this the way I want to. It has GIFs, and they can be animated, and you can post them into code reviews. And not only that, there's a meme button for every review or every comment where you can say, oh, I want to make this into a meme, and you tell it, well, I want this, picture of a kid going like this, and then you can type in whatever text, and it uses some fancy image magic in the background to create a new meme for you in your comments. So you can have a lot of snark in your code, and it's more entertaining. It is probably the best. In fact, I think when Evan came over, that was the first thing he set up for us, so is to make sure that we had all the image magic libraries and stuff we needed. And the other thing that so maybe more seriously, the other cool critical feature, especially for me, is this tool called Herald. And what Herald is basically just a I don't know, if it's almost like if this then that, except for your code. And so if somebody submits a code review, then you want certain actions to happen, and maybe that means add you as a follower to that code review, or add you as a blocking reviewer, so you have to approve it in order for that code to go in, or you maybe notify a different team, or maybe it's not code reviews you care about. You maybe care about commits, and if somebody commits some code, maybe you kick off a Jenkins build or something. So you can do all sorts of little like Rube Goldberg machines with just with a bunch of with this rules engine. And I can possibly show that off a little bit if we want. I can do some demo-y stuff too.
Okay, so it sounds like there's also some overlap here with where a lot of organizations might use Garrett.
Yeah, I don't remember what Garrett does.
It's code review.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that it though? I think Garrett brings more to the table than that.
Well, I mean that's the main way we're using Garrett right now, right? We have GG and Garrett.
I think it does. I mean, I think it overlaps with that, and I think I've heard that people who've used Garrett or used even Review Board before prefer those tools in some cases, to Fabricator. I think the real win with Fabricator is it's a nice suite of tools that all work well together. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention is the command line tool, Arc, is really good, especially in high-growth companies where you don't want to have to spend a lot of time teaching people Git. So Arc does a lot of stuff to wrap around Git, and the amount of commands you need to know to actually do your job, like to create a feature branch and to merge it back in, is a lot less because Fabricator takes care of a lot of things for you. You have two commands you mostly deal with. One is arc diff, which is I want to create a code review from this branch, and then arc land, which is okay, this has been approved, now I want it to be merged in, and it takes care of the merging strategy and all that crazy fun stuff, rebasing and whatever you need to do, and then gets it into master for you and deletes the branch. Like you don't have to do all that git cleanup.
Yeah. So why don't we I think like dive into some demo stuff. So
Yeah.
for those of you that consume the audio podcast, you're going to want to go find the YouTube stream because this is mostly a watching part. So
I'll try to be verbose.
okay.
Let's see. And let me find something nice to share. Okay.
One of the things I'm really curious to see too is how this might compare to something like Trello, because I read there's some like the Kanban boardy style stuff with the work tracking.
Sure, that's something I actually don't know much about because I didn't use that, but
Okay.
I've seen it. It looks nice. Oh, the other thing to remember is after this, after you guys listen to this, check out Fabricator's instance of Fabricator because they're using it a lot, and it's totally open to people. You just need to sign in with whatever account you have, and then you can see just kind of how they use it for milestones and issue tracking and stuff like that. I think they do a good example of well, dog fooding. So let's do some screen sharing now. Okay, it's my terminal window, right? Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So I am going to go to a project that I think is run by Fabricator at the moment. Here's one that seems pretty easy. Okay, so this is the command line tool called arc. Type it in, and then it says, "Ooh, exception no command provided to try arc help," and then you can see the things it does. Here's a few of the commands. So let's do a git pull, so I'm up to date. And let's wait for git. Okay, already up to date. So let's do arc feature. So let's say I want to do a new feature. New stuff. All right. So arc feature wraps around git branch and just creates all the branch, and it sets it to track master and all that. So that's nice. Let's see. Let's say I want to edit my requirements.txt. We'll just make a small change here. All right, awesome lib 2, 3. Now I want it to be code reviewed. Okay, so it says this is not what I expected. Okay, so you've unstaged changes in this working copy. Stage and commit or revert them proceeding. Usually it asks you, so that's why I'm kind of thrown off here. Okay, add this file. Here's my commit message. I added my new library. Okay. Summary. Please ignore. This is for the MyFitnessPal team to ignore. This is just a demo for Hangops.
Hangops shout out.
One of the things you can do is you can have a test plan. It's by default it's on, which means you just have to fill out this line here, and you have to say, hey, I want, this is what I did to test out my code. I made it optional for our team just because it just at some point it just doesn't make sense to like require this all the time, but it is a nice to have just to kind of encourage that, hey, the code I write actually has tests behind it and is legitimate. So reviewers, I can specify who I want to review, or I think the smarter approach is to have Herald, the tool I talked about, to automatically add reviewers. But let's say I added Solars and I saved it. it's smart enough to know that, hey, Solars doesn't actually exist in our system, and I should remove it. Fine, okay, so I have not specified any reviewers, continue anyway, yeah, we'll just do that. So it does a couple of things. The other thing it does before committing is it does a linting, and so you can configure lint for your project, and any files that you change that match those linting rules will just run through a linter. So whether it's PyFlakes or Pep8 or I'm sure Ruby has something like that too. It'll just check over it. So what it says is it gives me a URL that I can look at, and let me share the screen. Screen share. All right. So that's the link. Look at it.
There it is.
Okay. I added my new library. Please ignore it says demo. So this is just a summary of what I changed. And then if you keep scrolling down, you'll see the actual diff. And like I said, it's side by side. But I guess you get that now in GitHub, which is pretty awesome.
Right.
If you're a reviewer, you can approve this change. You can abandon it or whatever. You can add subscribers. You can also leave comments. So I mentioned that this has a system of putting in fun messages like, "Oh, it's a trap." That's cool. Let's see. The one feature I really wanted to show off, though, was Herald, and I'll show you how that works. So, Herald. So right now we have no actual rules for Herald, so we'll just create one. And so we can say, we'll have a new rule for, you can pick what the trigger is going to be. So I'm going to pick revisions being created. There's a few new options here, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to make a global rule because I'm an admin and I can. So I can set my condition. So one of the things I'll do is say, hey, if this repository matches, and let's find something interesting. Hold on one second. Did you guys see some weird Twitter stuff? Yeah, let's
Twitter opened up with some weird, or like blocked me or something. Anyway, okay, so.
So let's say any change file names equals requirements.text. And when that happens, you send an email to
D-dash.
dash.
What kind of actions are supported?
You can add a reviewer, blocking reviewer. You can run a build plan, which is basically like something. It's basically like webhooks and stuff. So at Pinterest, we had one that would just trigger a webhook to fire off Jenkins.
Yeah.
And that was pretty handy. So we could test all our any diffs that people would send up, and so before they got merged, their tests were their tests will run. But you can fire off any webhook too.
Okay.
Require legal signatures, maybe legal signatures. I've never used that one. That's kind of cool. But yeah, so the nice thing is like this, like the real use case for something like this is like, let's say you're the person who is an expert on, let's use webhooks as our example. So anytime somebody, you can change it, you can have a trigger that says, hey, anytime somebody has file content that mentions the word webhook, I want to know about it. You can set something up like that. You can do other triggers too, like at Pinterest they use the strategy of saying, hey, if somebody mentions help or API help, we want to be able to have like one of our team members that's in a rotation respond to it. And so then that would then trigger an email to a mailing list to say, hey, look at this revision. So you can do some cool little things that way.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so you've got your code review. You've sort of got your usual like development workflow. Are you guys using the wiki type feature for like documentation?
No. So both at Pinterest and then at MyFitnessPal, they're using Confluence. And those are things that kind of are already entrenched. So they're like, well, we're not going to move to this. I think the other thing is like in a lot of organizations, like the wiki is one of those things where it's like, well, you can either have like a really awesome wiki, but it's only awesome for technical people, or you can have an okay wiki, which is okay for everyone. And so you kind of have to make that trade-off, and most places end up making the trade-off of, let's just get something that's okay for everyone. But yeah, I love like GitHub's wiki. Fabricator's wiki, I assume, is pretty decent, since most of their tools are pretty decent. But I imagine it would be a barrier to entry for a lot of like folks that just don't deal with anything else in Fabricator. So why would they want to look at like, where to get your payroll information from, right? Like, why would you go to Fabricator for that?
Gotcha. Okay. So now you're using it for, you've got the browsing or the repository like hosting browsing, right? But what about the auditing piece? Like, do you use that?
Yeah. So the auditing piece is really nice, especially like so for MyFitnessPal, like our ops team is really small, so like the the code review stuff that we did, it was just kind of new to our team as a whole. A lot of us have worked in other organizations and we've done code review before, but just doing it as a team is new. So one of the nice things with auditing is you can say, hey, anytime somebody commits something, if there's no pre-commit diff attached, like throw up an audit. And so what'll happen is Fabricator will have all these commits that don't have attached diffs, and you can go through them after they've been committed and say, hey, this looks weird, or this is strange, or maybe you should have done things this way. And I think it's a nice approach for transition. I think long term it's kind of frustrating because the workflow for it is, I'm a developer, I'm writing code, I commit it to without doing a code review, and then someone else on my team sees that there's an audit for this, and then they go through it and they make suggestions, and I make those changes, and then I have to ping them and say, hey, I made these changes in this other commit, and then you have to go back to that original commit that's being audited and say, okay, I'm okay with this audit now, I'll approve it because I know later on you fixed it somewhere else. And so there's this, the conversation is kind of like disjointed with an audit, whereas with a code review, it's before it's committed and it's all kind of captured in one place, and that's kind of nice and handy.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's the way I see it.
Interesting. Gotcha. Okay. So you focus on the, was it differential, right? It's like review code
Yeah.
app. So you focus on using that. Now, are you guys using manifests, which is like tasks and bugs?
No, I've used it before a little bit, and it's nice. It's simple, and it's nice in the way that GitHub Issues is nice.
Yeah.
Um, but I think compared to things like it depends what you want. Like, so I think some people like a lot of metadata around their stuff. Like Jira, I think gives you everything under the sun
Yeah.
to describe your issue, whereas GitHub is a little bit more is a lot more bare bones. And I think I find Manifest to be kind of in between. Um, it's I think the advantage of Manifest is you can link it into other objects within Fabricator, like linking it back to other diffs or linking it back to other commits, and there's that nice clickability and kind of wiki-ish way of like looking at bugs. It's more interactive. Whereas, if you have Jira, you actually have to cut and paste the links and format them nice so it's succinct, and it can just get messy and gross when you have tools that aren't connected. But yeah, I think like ideally it'd be nice just to use, if you're going to use Fabricator, use as much of the tool chain as possible. But I know in some places it's just not a possibility.
Yeah. Well, what got me interested was kind of like I was kind of looking at like a side project, like if I kind of wanted to like self-host,
Mm-hmm.
just sort of thinking through that, like having like and it sort of handles, it's got the repository and the issues and the wiki, but then like there isn't as much like around like workflow stuff or like work management where you might use like something like Trello.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody was showing me Fabricator. It was Reed Loden
Okay.
from Mozilla. Or Mozilla. He's not Mozilla anymore, but
Hack
he's
away.
from originally. Anyway, and he like they were using some of it, and so I just was kind of exploring it. And that's kind of what prompted me. So like, I guess where I'm going with that is like if you were thinking like greenfield, how much would you maybe use this for? How much would you like funnel into this, and maybe where would you like then look at like something else if you're gonna, if assuming you want to self-host everything, like you just you just want to run everything yourself, like
So
what
is
all
it,
like roles would you use this for?
yeah. So are you thinking like a open source project, or are you?
Yeah, or maybe maybe like a small web startup, like or like even like an ops team, that's starting to do like they maybe want to just get Kanban and they're using like Puppet or Chef or I'm just kind of thinking of like those are the
I would,
two
yeah.
places I would think.
If I was starting from scratch, I would use as much of this as possible, and
Okay.
just say, you know what, we're like, especially if you're a small company, just starting off from here would be a nice approach, because you can just say, hey, you know what, all technical documentation and like on-call run books and software docs will go into the Fabricator's Friction wiki. We're going to use I pulled up here. I'll share it real quick. This is the project boards. So you can have teams. So we have a team called Nagios, and there's work boards associated with it, and so you can like start adding tasks here. And I think these are manifest tasks. I think you get like a nice set of features out of it, and it's okay, there. You get a lot of cool features out of it that are just kind of there, and they're probably not like the perfect ideal tool for that job, right? Like Trello is probably going to be the best Trello-like system out there, but Fabricator might be 80% of the way there. And if that's good enough for your team, I'd say yeah, use that, because you can then leverage all the integrations and stuff which you wouldn't get otherwise, such as one, linking to manifest tasks, two, linking to actual code commits and stuff, especially if your team is very code centric. Like these days everything is in code, so yeah, why wouldn't you use something like this? because there is a lot of there's a lot of like getting Confluence up and running is hard, and then like maintaining it is hard too. And why waste your time with that when you could have something like this? Um, the converse strategy, I think the only other viable alternative is use GitHub for everything. But I think after some time, like I think there's a breaking point with GitHub in terms of like usefulness, especially as your team gets large enough where you're like, oh, you know, who is agent 0123? Like, you have all these cool aliases that you use on GitHub, but they're not like they don't tie into like your LDAP or your Google Mail or whatever that your team uses to communicate. So you're starting to have to memorize a second set of aliases and stuff, and there's that huge disconnect. And then GitHub Enterprise is the other alternative, but that's usually too cost prohibitive for a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and as you mentioned, right, Fabricator's development is done in the open on their instance, which is secure.fabricator.org. There's an open. Let's see. .com, secure.fabricator.com with a PH. Those of you that are listening. Yeah, and I've poken around a little bit. It looks like you can really kind of explore, and it looks like they there's a lot of stuff that they're like working on expanding things like credential store, build, and CI stuff, service almanac, versioned artifact storage, like all kinds of interesting features.
And yeah, and I guess that's the other thing is that all these little things that are you might like if you're looking at the project without having used it a lot, you might be like, what is all this crap for? And a lot of them actually come in handy at like the weirdest times. Like for example, the credential store tool. One of the things I used it for was every time we would connect to a GitHub repository, we would just generate a new key and then add that as a deploy key in GitHub, and then connect things that way. And it was a really clean way of doing things. It's really secure because every GitHub project had its own unique deploy key, and it was all managed in Phabricator. And we never actually saw the private keys because they're all stored in a database somewhere. And that was a nice way of just keeping things a little bit separate. But yeah, they definitely have a vision and a roadmap. And I guess I should cover like if you're a company that like uses Phabricator a lot and you're like, wow, I really wish they had this feature, they will build it for you like for a reasonable cost, as long as it kind of goes into their roadmap a little bit. And if it doesn't, they might build it into a fork that you could use, or just say, hey, you know what, download the mainline Phabricator, but every time you do it, just apply these diffs, and you'll get, this weird feature that you want. But there's a lot of like interesting little things that you might look in there, and it's like, oh, why do they have that connection method to like, like login authentication? Like, why do they authenticate against this weird system that no one has used? It's like some small startup, and then you're like, oh, it's because that startup is one of their clients, and they paid them, to say, hey, we want this to be our SSO. Can you also add it as a login method? And I'll just be like, yeah, sure, we'll do it, and bill them accordingly.
Interesting. Yeah, there's definitely, I think, a lot to explore here. And the history, right, is that like the core, I think, diffusion and manifest and differential stuff is what came out of Facebook, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of this was open source from Facebook. And actually, just recently, like it used to be when you would check out the Phabricator project, it would be Facebook/Phabricator on GitHub. And I think just recently they moved it into their own organization called Facility. But yeah, it all came out from Facebook, which is why it's in PHP. But it, for those people who do not like PHP and don't really, maybe have horror stories of like Drupal and WordPress and stuff like that, I assure you that this is a fairly well-run project, despite any misgivings you might have with PHP.
So I guess maybe that's a good thing to sort of like wrap up on a little bit, unless there's more you want to cover. But what's the deployment look like?
Um, so for us, I mean, it's like Git. You just do a Git pull and make sure you have like the relevant PHP libraries, and then you point, Nginx or Apache at it. I've usually used Apache just because it seems to have a lot easier instructions to connect to, using mod PHP and stuff like that. Um, one of the nice things that Phabricator does for you is once it's up and running, it's backed by MySQL. Once it's up and running, it'll tell you like if there's errors in your installation. So it'll say, hey, you've got MySQL covered configured this way, but you may want to add these things into your my.cnf. Or it might say, hey, you know what, you don't have APC turned on, you should probably turn that on. Here's how you do it. Here's the config settings you need to change. So it's really helpful on how to do it. So I'm using Salt at MyFitnessPal and at Pinterest we use Puppet, but in both cases it was fairly trivial to do. And then what I did write is an update script, so I could run that in a cron job like once a week that just updates Phabricator, because usually it's pretty safe to stay on master. And if you don't like to live on the edge like I do, you can just run that manually when you feel like, hey, this is kind of stale. And if you like to live more on the edge than I do, you can just have it running like every day where it just updates, and it'll do like database transformations and stuff too. The other nice thing is it can grow with you a little bit. So let's say you are doing a lot of like code searching and it's kind of getting slow. Like you can expand it and just point it at an Elasticsearch cluster, and then it'll start using that instead.
Okay. So you've got PHP web server, MySQL, potentially Elasticsearch. Is using Memcache?
I don't know. I don't think so.
You're not using Memcache. Okay. So it's like minimum, like could just be one box, maybe two. Like 4 is like HA kind of minimum.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say one box for your web front end, and then one for your, and then whatever your, usually like if you're a large enough organization, you probably have like an admin DB for your ops related stuff or an infra DB, and you can just point it at that existing MySQL database if you have one, or just set up another one in like in a nice replication set, so that way your data is covered. And then the other thing you might want to do is make sure that your source code is backed up regularly, or just on an EBS volume if you're in AWS. So if something happens to your instance, you can boot back up without too much struggle. If that's especially the case if you're hosting your repositories on Phabricator. If you're just mirroring from somewhere else, you're pretty resilient to disaster as long as your code is like in Chef or Salt or whatever, and your data is backed up somewhere using whatever MySQL backup strategy you normally use at your company.
Okay, cool. Now, can you toggle on and off the applications you want available in your Phabricator install?
Yeah. You can do that for yourself or for like the company wide, and so that's actually, let's look together because that's fun. So let's see, Phabricator, configure Phabricator. Let's see, that's not what I wanted. I wanted applications. So let's say the friction wiki. So yeah, you can set policies like who can use the application and who can configure it, or you can uninstall it entirely. If you're like, I don't want anyone touching friction because we just use Confluence, and that's fine too. So yeah, you can turn on and off things. There's a lot of beta applications too. I don't know where they are right now, but they're there somewhere. Um, and those are, yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, they keep adding to this a lot. But yeah, there's a lot of tools out there that you can turn on and off if you need to.
Cool. Anything else we should know about it?
No, it's pretty easy to install. They're super helpful on IRC. So if you hop into the Fabricator room on Freenode, they're Evan's usually there to answer stuff, and it's got a nice community around it. And you know, if you don't get anywhere with them, you can feel free to shoot me an email too, or ping me on Twitter, and I'll help if I can if you're stuck on something. But usually going to them has been pretty good. And I've always had good luck just talking to them and just saying, hey, I want to set it up at company. What do I need? Or they want this specific feature. Can you guys build that? And he's just usually super responsive and tells me whether it's possible and stuff like that. So, yeah, you're going to be well supported here. And I think I honestly feel like if you deal with open source, this is a good model to follow. Just if you can pull it off, because they do such a good job with maintaining it that. Thumbs up to the facility team.
Cool. Well, no, I think it's an interesting tool. I think it's one that still relatively unknown, so it's cool to give it a little more exposure.
Yeah, definitely consider it. If existing tools aren't working for you.
Cool. All right, cool. Well, we'll wrap it up there. I'm not sure if we're going to do another one on Friday or not. We'll see if any good topics come up. But thanks for taking some time to kind of give us the rundown on this.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks.
Cool. All right, we'll catch you later.